I will speak about, I will start with a little research, well, not a little research, it was my thesis research about the monster, the idea of the monster that I think that interests Jota too. So I started collecting some images from the eviction movement, or the movement for housing in the center of São Paulo in about the 2003, 2004, 2005. So I was impressed. I was thinking about this concept, the monster, and I found this image of a big, a huge occupy in the center of São Paulo. It was about 2,000 people in the center of São Paulo that occupied, and I thought, that's my monster. That's the monster I want to understand what's happening. And well, I'm going to show many pictures, many images, but not to comment all of them because we have no time. But just to say that this occupation resisted for 3, 4, 5 years with some movements because I think that with the help of artists, designers, architects, they were trying to invent another discourse, other feelings about what was happening there. So I just show the images. So this is the collective Bijari. They thought about this idea of gentrification. Many images, the moments of eviction, and then people went to the street and occupied the street. And I was interested about this kind of nomadic ways of living in the downtown, in the center of this São Paulo. And the media, mainstream media, call them rats. So this kind of tactic to use the media speech about this movement, about people, and try to carnivalize, try to invert this discourse. And with many posters and things like that. So I just show you some images, people ignoring. I work with dreams, people's dreams, all the people, kind of performances in the moments of eviction, carnivalizations, masks, the use of masks. I was looking at this kind of elements to think about resistance in a very material, concrete way. This is a mural, and they, with all the occupations in São Paulo. So I was working with this in contradiction of the Leviathan monster. This was my monster. And then 10 years later, all this movement became an exhibition in Rio de Janeiro. And well, my speech is not about not allowing artists to be in a museum or not to participate in a kind of exhibition, but I thought that there was a real problem there. So in Rio, we were fighting, many people, against the evictions, the removal of some favelas, and this is one that is situated in the place that they are constructing, the Olympic Park. It's called Vila Autódromo. I made to them this logotype, and I was very happy that they used it a lot with the colors of the Olympic Games. Well, we were watching this kind of gentrification, revitalization of this part of Rio de Janeiro because of the Olympic Games, but also the waterfront, just like here, kind of revitalization. Come faccio per uscire?
Fica fora.
Sì. And in this area of the waterfront, there are favelas too, and they were being removed by the municipality with the agreement of the PT. That's why Giuseppe explained this morning a little bit of our impression of what the kind of the work the PT was doing in Rio, and so they were people were evicted. Well, just so, and these were artists' interventions just to see that people were living there, and so in this moment, 10 years after that big, huge movement in São Paulo, we were in Rio, and I was thinking about this kind of thing, that these many museums that are being created in Rio de Janeiro, 3 big museums, and in the inauguration of this museum, everybody was there, the mayor, the government, Dilma, and the mainstream media, and many artists, as I told you, that big movement became an exhibition. 3 months later, it was in March, we were there, the Nomadic University, many companions, we were there, and outside. We were just seeing, and 3 months later, we had a very big feeling in that moment. 3 months later, the movement, June 2013, started. Luigi, mi aiuti? Wow. So the movement started. The protests started in June, and the movement started very strong, in a strong way, and in the first moment, yes, government didn't knew how to think about this thing, what that was happening, and from some years, Dilma, well, we were hearing a kind of C-class discourse. The left wing was always telling, oh, now people can consume, oh, now, well, and C-class here, C-class there, everybody thinking about C-class, the emerging of a C-class. And when the movement started, we hear about multitudes sometimes, or monster. People talked about monstrous, what are these monstrous protests? But in a very negative way. They were seeing that thing with fear. This protest causes fear. So I try to think about that in other ways. There are very, yes, as Camilo showed you, very moments, very divertiti, no? Divertenti, no? Dei momenti divertenti. Come questo, in this moment in the Confederation Cup. And people started occupying the streets, this is in front of the governor's apartment, luxury apartment. And also many others, people went in front of the mayor's house trying to evict, to remove the mayor. So this kind of thing started. And also this, the speech, this idea from the governments of the 3 levels, the municipality, the state of Rio, and the federal level, always talking about what's happening. Why people are not happy with all we have done for them in 12 years. And well, and then there are 2 very tragical episodes in Rio de Janeiro, that marked. Yes, as Camilo has shown to you, we have statistics. They are very dramatic, but in this moment, 2 things happened, and there was a kind of very strong mobilization and artistical mobilization, and. The 2 episodes were the murder, the torture and the murder of Amarildo, that's a bricklayer in Rocinha, a big slum, And the other episode was in a protest. Poor people cannot protest. We from a kind of middle class, yes, but poor people, no. And there was a protest in the favela, and 13 people were killed in a very terrible way. And I saw this image. This image is from a collective, one of the many collectives that were formed in the streets, just in the streets. It's called Projetação. And I like this image because they just project images during the protests. And it means amar é amaré, amarildo, love is the wave or the tide amarildo. So let me say something about this. It was a very, well, I forgot to say many things, but I just can come back afterwards. It was a very, perhaps I may come. É casino com l'inglese, mi dispiace, è un po' un casino con l'inglese. Bene, I was, well, I wanted to understand the kind of aesthetic we can find in these movements. So first of all, I should say about the carnivalization, but I can talk about it later. I thought about the aesthetics of the occupation of public spaces. And Amarildo, I was thinking about an aesthetic of connection. So this kind of connection between the entrance of the street and the street of the Rio de Janeiro, of the city, until the exit of the city. Amarildo was kind of a tide, a marea, a wave that make a very strong subjectivity. And I was thinking about this connection. A connection with some subjects that perhaps the left governments couldn't see. There were subjects, but a lot of subjectivity, especially much subjectivities. And a connection that was not an organization, but perhaps a kind of body without organs. And I remember that when Tony Negri tried to explain this idea of the monster, he was thinking about a body without organs, like Deleuze used to think. And a kind of connection that was functioning, but not in a functional way. It's a kind of contamination, like a virus that connected all these subjectivities. So I was thinking about carnivalization, occupations, and especially the kind of connection that I will show you now. It's part of the performance, I think. Thank you. So this is Amarildo's family, and I like to see this. All this production, they are not produced always by artists, but I think there was something artistic, and I think about a general artisticity, like Marx used to say. General intellect, I think of a general creativity, a general artisticity that was expressing itself by those days. So this is this kind of general artisticity. Here's when the Pope come to Rio. Here's the march. How do you say a Marcha das Vadias?
Slut walk.
Huh?
Slut walk.
Slut?
Walk.
Okay. In that moment, thank you, Jota. And when the Pope, so the Pope is here, but where is Amarildo? And I think that was a kind of you can say that multitude was making art. Multitude was making art. We could even say that multitude was making love. That's why that image is of amar é amaré, amarildo. Where is Amarildo? I was thinking about this thing, art as a big connection, art as the capacity, the potentiality to make this connection. I was not interested in the artistical expressions itself, but of this connection, that this production, this collective production could produce. And it was a very strong, this moment was very strong, and the manifestants, one day they went to the museum, that museum, they went back there, and they have done this kind of projection, Rio de Janeiro on war, I don't know, and there was a tense moment where the protesters were outside the museum, and I read in the Facebook that there was a moment that then the curator, the chief curator, went outside, and they had a kind of thing that covered their faces, not to be recognized by the police. And the curator said, "Well, you afraid me. You are making me afraid. You're making me fear you." And one of the manifestants replied, "Oh, why? That's just a performance." I think that's very, very interesting. Well, that's about the way. And then I talked to you. Well, I showed you a first moment before the movement. Then in this great moment of the movements. And well, to end my very messy presentation, I want to yes, this is the third part, the first group of images that I started collecting to make a bridge between Amarildo's moment, a very strong moment, and then the World Cup came, and we were under repression, I can say, because in the eve of the World Cup, there were some at least 23 preventive arrests. And for example, the thing that Camilo showed, the Bakunin, they were looking for Bakunin, for example. I was very afraid because I have read Mikhail Bakhtin, I love Bakhtin, and I think if a policeman gets here and he takes my Bakhtin's book, I was really afraid of that. And that's, I started collecting this kind of, these images too, but also participating. We have Amarildo, that's an image that shows that we have Amarildos every day. That's an image made in the favela.
The story of the Bakunin, it's funny because the intelligence of repression, it's always the same. In the 60s, they went into Ferreira Goulart, who is a poet and an art critic in Brazil, and was left-wing affiliated to the Communist Party in the 60s. And they went in his house and they arrested him because, well, he had took some of his books, political books, out, but he left a book on Cubism, and they thought that the book on Cubism was about Cuba. And so they arrested him.
The problem is the police that it's violent and also very stupid, and that's a problem. It's very Cubism that it's from Cuba, or Bakhtin that it's Bakunin. It's very difficult to deal with police that it's also stupid. Violent and stupid. And this is a very interesting moment that to think about this dialogue between the aesthetic of the politics and the politics of the aesthetic, because this was one of the artists, real artists from the 70s, I don't know if you know him. He's called Cildo Meirelles, and in the 17th, there was a journalist that was killed, and he made this piece, Who Killed Herzog, the journalist. And well, I've talked about carnivalization, about occupation, about connection as a kind of aesthetic, kinds of tactics that we could use to think and to act in the kind of situation that we were living. And now just talk about insertions. And Cildo Meirelles, in this moment of repression in the World Cup, he made this bill, this note, Cadê Amarildo? And the idea of insertion, how do you make a circulation of artworks? But in a very, it's an art, a very simple artwork that circulates a lot. So he was thinking about insertions in the 70s, and when there was the Cadê Amarildo movement, he repeated this kind of insertion. And I think that the movement tried to use this kind of tactic in this moment. There was the repression based on Facebook and Twitter. There was repression in the city, in the urban space. For example, by those days, people couldn't protest downtown because they were isolated. So the idea was to protest at Copacabana, where there were all the tourists, a very macho tourist, kind of tourist that goes to see the football games, to drink beer, and they were there at Copacabana. So the idea was to go to Copacabana and to make things there. This is, I cannot, well, a festa. Você pode traduzir para mim?
The part in the stadiums doesn't deserve the tears
in the stadium. Yes. Thank you, Camilo. It was a very important thing. Yeah, the fuck FIFA that Camilo showed you. This one was an insertion in Maracanã. Yeah, that's the part at the stadiums. Doesn't work, isn't worth the tears. Yes. Fuck FIFA in the fan FIFA. This kind of insertion everywhere. It was a way of communicating with people, with tourists, with people that were visiting the city, with media, mainstream media, not Brazilian mainstream media, but from outside, to make this dialogue. This was an important one because there was also the prostitution that comes with the World Cup, the problem. This was a despacho. How can we translate this? Well, it's a kind of a religious, a ritual, a popular ritual to exorcise. Yeah. Yeah, it was during the World Cup, but try to exorcise the Olympic Games that will be next year. I don't know if it's going to function. Despacho olímpico. At Copacabana, everything what was made at Copacabana tried to use the mainstream media from other countries and all the journalists to try to communicate something. This is the removals, as remoções, the evictions, yes, in Rio de Janeiro. And then that's well, to talk about censorship, as we couldn't speak. It was written in English to communicate with the media in that moment. Oh. Okay. And this is an image I have done with to think that Neymar, you know Neymar, the football, the soccer player, and in those moments it was a little boy, Luis Felipe, that was killed. And so I made this thing to remember that Neymar once was Luis Felipe, and that Luis Felipe could become Neymar if he wasn't killed. So to end my presentation, I think that I started showing you that thing that happened, all the movements from São Paulo got to Rio and become an exhibit. And for me, that was a huge problem to the art system, to artists. And I have my friends, my artist friends, they say, oh, you cannot say that. You are in the university as a designer. Why can't we artists at the museum? I say, yes, I think that artists can be in the galleries and the museums, but we have to think about that. So I think that this kind of thing that we are doing here as from the aesthetic of the politics and the politics of the aesthetic, I think that about that as a kind of dialogue between institutions and movements, institutions and the whole society, and thinking about that from the aesthetical point of view, thinking politics about this aesthetical point of view, and we use in common, we have Jacques Rancière as a common author. It's very useful, it's very important. I think about Jacques Rancière because he really thinks about, when he uses the term aesthetical, he's thinking about how to put together poiesis, the art of making, the making, and the aesthesis, the reception, without passing through mimesis, without passing through representation. So I think that this kind of aesthetic feeling that he provokes us can be used to reimagine politics para além beyond the representation. That's what I had to tell you.